Rugby Championship 2020 to be held in New Zealand. All the games. That seems to be the speculation that I've read in the media today. I guess this kind of thing was expected. I will open this package which has arrived from Russ. It arrived today. I'll open that at the end of the video. So stick around if you want to see what's in there. But essentially, this video is about... I read it through Reddit, and it does link through to a slightly more credible news source than just Reddit, but Reddit is pretty good for that kind of thing. I read it on Reddit. It linked through to the Australian, an article which I don't have access to because I'm not a subscriber to the Australian, and you have to be a subscriber to read their news stories. But the America's Rugby News, three places I'm referencing, essentially summarized the article. So it's talking about the idea that New Zealand could host the Rugby Championship here this year. So that would be the Aussies, South Africans and Argentinians coming here to New Zealand to play all of the games of the Rugby Championship, which is quite a lot of games to play. The article mentioned that Argentina, South Africa and Australia are likely to approve. Prior to all this, all the talks have been about Australia wanting to hold it. I guess in terms of time zones, there's not really an ideal solution for either way because, you've got South America, Africa, which is kind of just similar time zone to Europe, and Australia and New Zealand, all in different areas of the world, which again is one of the difficult points about the competition itself. But yeah, having it in New Zealand, mainly, seemingly from what I read, because of the crowd factor. So New Zealand here, our lockdown level is still level 1, which is not quite back to normal, but for all intents and purposes, barring the most specific things, is back to kind of everyday life. So for example, there's free rein on stadium attendance at rugby games, which seems to be an attractive prospect, I guess, in terms of making money and selling the product, because Super Rugby Australia is going to get underway this weekend, or Friday and then Saturday, and they are limiting, I think, some of the games to, I think it was 10,000 fans. So you'd like to think internationals would be able to draw a bit more than that. 10,000 fans is definitely going to draw the jokes about will they even get 10,000 fans to a Super Rugby game in Australia. Hardy ha ha. Hopefully we do, as long as it's all safe and run properly. But yeah, all matches in New Zealand, and yeah, no limit on crowds. So I get the way that it makes sense, especially with Victoria, one of the states in Australia, having a recent kind of resurgence in COVID cases. It makes sense that New Zealand, we're still getting cases, but all people so far, fingers crossed, knock on wood, people being stopped at the border returning from overseas. So there's no community cases that we know of. Again, cross your fingers and do all those lucky things. All the cases so far have been stopped at the border. So we should still be able to get people at games. I think the Rebels aren't going to be able to hold their games in Victoria because of the resurgence in cases. So yeah, New Zealand games, no limits on fans. It's preferable, probably a bit of a moneymaker. I was thinking about it. So for all the matches in New Zealand, it means you got to get those three teams over here to New Zealand. You'd have to bring a pretty big squad because flying over an injury replacement is not going to be what it used to be. You've got to add a 14-day quarantine to whatever time they have when they come back. So New Zealand's still got a period, I think most countries have got it, a 14-day stand-down period where, at least in New Zealand, you're isolated off in a hotel and you're not allowed to leave for 14 days. So if you injured your key prop and needed somebody else to cover, you better hope that game's not for at least 2 weeks, otherwise he's not going to be able to participate in the game. So yeah, that was one question. I don't know how they would do the flights, because I think the flights with people coming back to New Zealand are pretty full of people at the moment. They might have to charter flights. I know when New Zealand's rugby league team, who participates in the NRL, which is their rugby league competition, when they went over to Australia to get permission, they got special government permission, and they had to charter a flight to get over, I guess, so they weren't mixing with more people than needed to be. I would have thought that would probably have to be a sensible measure. And what kind of facilities are these guys going to go to? You can't realistically expect a bunch of rugby players to just sit in a room for 14 days. They would probably need like a whole facility with a gym and everything to at least be able to keep their fitness levels up, even if they're not allowed to do any training. So it would be a bit of a logistical one. And in terms of the actual mechanics of that, like our governments, I mean, a lot of governments have had problems just getting normal people into normal hotel rooms and not getting them to mingle and remembering to test them before they leave. So this would be another level on that in terms of the logistical challenge. It sounds easy to say it, but there's probably a lot of moving parts involved. So yeah, that would have to happen. The government would have to approve it, because right now New Zealand's only letting citizens and residents back into the country. So for those 3 countries, citizens to enter New Zealand, they would need to get a government exemption. That's not impossible. I think the government's been fairly favourable in dealing with New Zealand rugby. And I mean, they've let like some movie crews back in to film one of the Avatar movies. So yeah, if they can do it for movie crews, I wouldn't see why they couldn't do it for rugby players. But again, you do have that added complication of them probably not wanting to just twiddle their thumbs in a hotel room for 2 weeks without any access to, like I said, exercise equipment or ability to train. So if all that stuff got across the line, South Africa's happy with it, Argentina's happy with it, Australia's happy with it, New Zealand's happy with it, and they can get the government to agree to it, and they can find a way to quarantine them, allow them to train, so they might have to come pretty bloody early, bring a big squad, and then you got to think, I mean, the All Blacks games should be pretty well attended if this all goes ahead. How well will we get attendance for games which don't involve New Zealand? Maybe not the same appeal. This might be a chance, if it happens, it's still a big if, for them to take some games around to the regions a bit, maybe places that don't usually get internationals. Kind of like a Rugby World Cup feeling, not quite at that same level obviously, but a bit of a mini Rugby World Cup, so you might see some games at stadiums that haven't had international rugby for a long time. I think Christchurch is begging for one, but their stadium I think has put limitations on that. And there's plenty of other places as well. So obviously if they can get it all done safely, if they can get all the boxes ticked, everybody's happy to do it, then I think Kiwis here would be pretty encouraging of having the tournament. I know there's a fair few expat South Africans here. There's probably a decent little Aussie community floating around, and there's a lot of Kiwis in Australia. I'm sure there must be the reverse to some degree. How many Argentinians live in New Zealand? Probably a bit less common, but I like to think that the fans will get out to watch some of the teams. I certainly would get to as many games as I reasonably could if it were to happen, but there's also the time zones to worry about. Would you play, if it was technically supposed to be Argentina's home game against Australia, would you play it at a time which is favourable to Argentinian fans? It could be at a really, really funny hour, but yeah, there's still a lot of moving parts. Who knows whether this will get across the line. I would say at the moment it seems like probably the best option, just because New Zealand can have full stadiums. So yeah, that's generally preferable when watching international rugby. You want lots of people in the crowd. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. What do you guys reckon? Can you see this going ahead? As I said, there's still a lot that would have to be organised, and how keen would you be for it to go ahead? Leave those thoughts in the comments. Quickly onto this package, which came all the way from Russ via, I believe, a contact of his in Western Australia. Now, it's a team which, to be honest, I hadn't heard of before. I believe it's a club team over there in Western Australia. It is the Geraldton Bull Sharks. There you go. Geraldton Bull Sharks. I guess they've got some big old sharks over there in the water in Australia. I know the surfing over there is generally a pretty cool thing. So I think the honey badger was always surfing out there in Australia. So that's pretty slick, man. And it's been a bit chilly here in Auckland, so a nice sweater with a big old bull shark on it. Geraldton Rugby Union Club. Very slick. So thank you for that, Russ. And and your mate who helped organise it. Very slick. What can I say? I might have to go to Geraldton if I ever make my way over to Western Australia. It's not a place that I had heard of, but I certainly have now, so it's on the list. But yeah, you guys let me know what you reckon about this. Do you think this is going to get off the ground? How keen would you see it to be? Other obstacles that I haven't thought of? Maybe some other benefits that you've thought of. And yeah, cheers again to Russ for the jersey. I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.